This is our third week in the More Than a Resolution series. As we all know, most New Year's resolutions don't live past the first 30 days. And that's why we've introduced the idea of making more than a resolution. We've kind of boiled the thought down behind this more than a resolution to one central question. What does God want to do in me and through me in 2020? More than a resolution is much more than setting some goals for the year. It has to do with God-centered pursuits. It has to do with words like mission, calling, purpose, transformation, conviction, passion, revelation, covenant, encounter, sacrifice, and the list could go on and on. It's the idea of hearing from God and His will and plan become your highest priority in 2020. So my question is, how can we come to know God's will in 2020? We're going to spend the majority of our time in Exodus chapter 33. If you want to turn over there right now, you can. We're going to get to this in just a moment. Let me set some of the backdrop to this story. Moses was called by God to lead the children of Israel to the promised land. A lot of us are familiar with this story. But the assignment that Moses had been given came with a lot of challenges. I want to give you a couple things to remember. I want you to remember that this wasn't Moses' idea or plan to lead these people to the promised land. It was the calling, the mission, and the destiny God had placed upon him, and Moses answered the call. He didn't just sit around and come up with the idea of leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. He connected with God, heard from God, and then he was launched into his destiny. It was not just some goal that he had come up with. It was his mission and an assignment that God had given to him. Even though Moses had been given instruction to lead the people out of Egypt to the promised land, there were a lot of challenges along the journey. In Exodus 33, Moses is faced with difficult circumstances that he didn't anticipate. Now, prior to chapter 33, let me set the stage. Moses is gone for 40 days. He's up on Mount Sinai, and he's having a holy encounter with God himself. And it's there that he's talking to God, receiving revelation from God. And it's there Moses is given the tablets. The 10 commandments are handed to Moses. Moses was up there for 40 days seeking the Lord. What would that have been like? How awesome would that have been? Well, when Moses is gone for 40 days, the people that are down below in the valley didn't know what happened to him. So here's what they say in Exodus chapter 32, verse 1. Let me read it. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So what does this group of people end up doing? They end up rebelling and turning to false gods. Remember, they have Aaron help them make a golden calf, and they're dancing around the fire. They're dancing around this golden calf, and they've returned to their old ways again. So here is Moses now coming back from this divine encounter with God, and he comes down the mountain, and when he looks out and he sees all that is happening, he's so disgusted that he takes the 10 commandments and he smashes them on the ground. So in chapter 33, there is a real need to hear from God on where to go from here. I have a question for you. Have you ever been faced with some God assignments that didn't go according to plan? You ever been there before? God has given you some assignments. We kind of get an idea in our head how everything is going to go. And then all of a sudden we come to realize this isn't how things are going to unfold for us. Part of the reality of accomplishing the assignment God gives us is something called free will. How many of you know we can't control the actions of others? So Moses had no idea that when he came down from the mountain, the people would have sunk into debauchery and idol worship. Certainly this isn't what Moses had envisioned when he had come down from the mountain. He had spent 40 days in the presence of God. And here he is coming down to this. How many of you know this is a picture of our own lives? On Sunday, we gather together, and so many times we come into service, man, we lift our hands. Did we not encounter the presence of God today? We are just on top of the mountain. We're seeking God. It feels so good to be in his presence. And then Monday shows up, and we are slapped by reality. Moses comes down from the mountain back to reality. And after this reality is set in, God tells Moses that he's going to continue to lead the people in the land, but there's some changes to the plan. I want you to look with me at Exodus 33, verse 3. Listen to what God says to Moses. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. Now, God is speaking here. But I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people and I might destroy you on the way. How many of you would like to have received that word? Huh? Yeah, you're gonna still go into the land. You're gonna still go carry out the assignment with the giants in the land and conquering the city. But guess what? I have some news for you. I am not going with you, because if I go with you, I might kill you on the journey. How many parents do I have that are here? You ever been on a journey with those kids and you're thinking, oh, dear Jesus, I might kill some children on this journey. Maybe I should stay home. Well, this is what God is saying about his kids. He's like, I'm not going with you, but you're gonna still go. It is in this reality. It is within this chaos. Moses teaches us how to find God. How many of you in 2020 know that there are gonna be some things that you face that aren't gonna go according to plan? I got a news flash for you. There's gonna be a few things on the journey in 2020 that aren't gonna happen exactly how you envision them. So what does Moses do? Let's pick up. Exodus 33, verse 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to camp. Before we break this passage down, let me clarify something real quick if I could. It talks about Moses at the tent of meeting that he put out himself here. I just want to say to those of you that are familiar with the desert tabernacle, this is something that's different. This predates the tabernacle that they carried with them. This is Moses' own tent of meeting that he set up with his own hands. It predates the desert tabernacle, because sometimes scripture does say the tent of meeting and it's talking about the tabernacle, but I don't want you to get that confused with this particular tent. So here we have Moses who's been slapped by reality, the reality of life, and he needs some clarity and direction. So what does Moses do? Brings us to our first observation today. Write it in. Moses established a place to meet with God. If we want to cut through all the noise life can bring our way, we have to establish a place to meet with God. Exodus 33:7 says, now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Let me ask you a real simple question. Who was it that pitched the tent? Who took the time to do it? It was Moses himself. Now, before I move on, as I was preparing this message and reading this passage, it reminded me of a minister who was giving a message, and it was one of the funniest and most humiliating bloopers I've ever seen in a message before. That the individual is standing before the congregation, he's talking about Lot, and he says, Lot, he was trying to say Lot had pitched his tents too close to Sodom, but here is actually what he said.
And then the following week, last week, we were talking about Lot, and we were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, and we were talking about how Lot chose to go pinch his tits. Excuse me. Pitch his tents. Pitch his tents is what I said. And you heard nothing else here. This is church, my gosh. So he was pitching his tents close to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so what happened was, when he did that, he was getting too close to evil. And what I was challenging you guys to not do was to pick friends that were going to lead you to, man, stop laughing. All right? Man, am I red right now? Holy cow! Allie, I hope this isn't on videotape, because I have no job now.
Poor guy. It is a tricky phrase, you know. It's like one of those, you know, tongue twisters. In order for Moses to establish a meeting place with God, he and he alone had to make this a priority in his life. If Moses didn't take the time to establish a meeting place, it could have easily been something he never got around to. How many of you know it's easy to let the business of life and life's distractions to keep us from establishing a place to meet with God? Many people will say, but Pastor, you don't understand. I'm just too busy. And I want to follow up by saying, too busy doing what? Too busy doing this? Too busy doing this? Too busy doing this? Too busy doing this? You see, I believe, write it in, it might be in your notes, I believe if we really, really want to establish a place to meet with God, we can redeem the time from somewhere. The great reformer Martin Luther said, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Moses knew in the midst of his chaos and confusion, taking the time to establish a meeting place was the most important thing he could do. Moses was setting his priorities for life. And if we are going to hear from God in 2020, we must establish a regular place to meet with God. What else did Moses do? Point number 2, here it is. He set up a tent. He set up a tent. I've had the opportunity to go on a few backpacking trips, and man, I really enjoy getting out into the great outdoors, and I've had the opportunity to do it with several of the men that are here in this congregation. But one of the things that every backpacker who's going into the woods for several days will carry with them, it is an essential piece of every a part of equipment that we have. We have in our backpacks a tent that we carry with us, right, Eric? This baby is important, is it not? In fact, I want to have, come on up here, Cliff. Would you come up here? Cliff was one of the guys that went on the backpacking trip with me, and I'm going to have Cliff work on this for a minute or two as I continue on. Cliff, just set up the frame and the body. Don't worry about the rain fly or all that other stuff. Just set up those two parts of it all, if you would. He's fast, man. In fact, every one of the men that I've gone with on these trips have carried one of these. Now, let me tell you what happens. We've been on a long journey somewhere and we finally reach our destination. And whenever we arrive at camp, after a long journey, everybody comes in. There's usually about, 10 or 12 of us. We start scouting out different areas and we finally pick the area where we're gonna land. And the first thing we all do is we all go off on our own and we begin this very activity right here. We start setting up our own tent for ourselves. And once we are finished setting up the tent, we will move from there and then we'll move on with the common areas, the place where we're gonna cook, the place where we're gonna hang out, the place where we're gonna gather. But it's this area that is the most important area for us. Now it says of Moses, let me read it again, Exodus 33:7. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp. When we think about establishing a place to meet with God in our daily lives, the tent couldn't have been a more perfect illustration of what God is after. It's a beautiful picture of what God is trying to establish with every one of you. So under this point, write it in if you would. Let's talk about the tent itself. Here it is. A tent is a place to find shelter, is it not? The tent is a place to get out of the storm, a place to find rest, a place to recoup, a place of safety. This is exactly what establishing a place to meet with God is all about. We need a place where his presence can come and we can find, how many of you know, we need shelter from the storm because life gets tough every now and then. We need a place where we can go and get into the presence of God to find rest and be restored. The tent is the symbol of that place. Listen to what it says in Psalms 91. Verse 1 through 10. He's getting it, isn't he? Doing a good job. Imagine that Moses would go through this very activity, a lot more laborious than what's happening here. Tents were much more difficult to set up. Listen to what it says in Psalms 91, 1 through 10. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. A rampart is a defensive wall. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you say, the Lord is my refuge, and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. What did Moses do? In the midst of confusion, in the midst of chaos, he took the time to establish a place where he could get out of the storm and find rest. What else about the tent? Write it in. A tent is not a permanent structure. The tent is not made to stay in any one place. It travels with me. Now get this tent travels with me wherever I go. No matter where Moses went in life, he always established a place to meet with God. That's what I want you to get this morning. As I thought about the men I've gone backpacking with, we've had quite a variety of men go on this trip together. We've had young men, middle-aged men, older men. We've had men who are in shape, men who are not in shape. We've had single men, married men, divorced men, remarried men. We've had men with no kids, men with small kids, men with teenagers, men with adult children, and men with grandchildren. We've had men who were in school, men who were working, and men who were retired. We had men from all walks of life and different nationalities. But no matter what age we all are and what stage we are all in, every one of us would do the same thing when we arrive in this place in the wilderness and reached our destination. We set up our tents. You see, the tent of meeting is a symbol of a place that goes with you wherever you go. You might be single, you might be a parent, you might be divorced, you might be retired, you might be young, you might be old. It doesn't matter. Whatever phase of life we are in, if we are going to have a vibrant relationship with the Lord in 2020, we have to set up our tent. We have to set up and establish the place we are going to meet with Him. The beauty about a tent that goes in a backpack, God is saying, it doesn't matter what phase you're in. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what life looks like. This is to be established in your life wherever you are. The first thing that Moses did every time the Israelites moved to a new place was he set up a tent. He established a place to meet with God. And thirdly and finally today, what else did Moses do? He had a strategic, write this in, location. Look at where Moses established his meeting place. Exodus 33 verse 7. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away. What can we glean from Moses' actions? What does he teach us? When Moses established a place to meet with God, he strategically set up his tent away from any distractions. Folks, he unplugged from distractions so he could plug into a divine connection. It's quite a place to teach us. It's a quiet place to be. What wisdom. If Moses had set up a tent right in the middle of camp, how many of you know that would have been in the middle of a lot of distractions and a lot of interruptions, would have been right in the middle of where he was. But Moses said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to establish this outside the busyness of life. You see, Moses doesn't live in the world of modern technology, but he did understand distractions that surround him. If you're going to establish a meaningful time with the Lord, distraction-free, you're going to have to look for a place where you can meet with Him, and that's different for all of us. The first thing you have to do is identify your own personal distractions, the things that demand your attention. Could we take just a moment? I put that there in your notes. What are some of the things that demand the most of your time and attention? Would you take a minute? Let's take just a second. Let's talk about some of the distractions in our personal lives. What does it look like for you? Every list is going to be a little bit different. Take just a second and write some of the things down that distract you. What are the things that demand your time? Moses certainly knew what his were. And he separated himself so that he could have that quality time with the Lord. Now, for every one of us, it's going to be a little different. I think about the mom who stays home and has the little ones that are there. Maybe you have a 3-month-old and maybe you have a year and a half old, and then maybe you have a 5-year-old that's off at school in kindergarten. So for that mom, it might look a little bit different because those are huge things that demand your time. So maybe my tent of meeting is on the rare occasion when I've got these two sleeping at the same time, that is going to be my established moment, distraction free. I'm tuning everything else out and I'm going to spend some time with the Lord there. You know, for the career person, you're on the go all the time. You're spending 8, 10, 12 hours doing what you do during the day. From the moment you get up to the moment you go to bed, you're out there getting after it for whatever you're trying to do to better your family and career. So for you, it might look a little bit different. You might have to get up a little earlier in the morning just before you normally head out, where it's a little bit quiet and you can say, Lord, here I am, distraction free. I put my phone aside, the TV's off. I'm here in your presence in the quietness of the morning just before I head out. Lord, speak, for your servant is listening. Or maybe for others of you, you're better in this setting. You're driving to work and you've got quite a ways to go. So you've decided my meeting place is I'm turning that radio off. I'm going to put on some tunes that worship the Lord, and I'm going to get in my vehicle on my way to church, on my way to work. And it is here that before all the chaos begins, I'm just going to meet with God here. How many of you know we can all establish a place to meet with him? Regardless of what stage or phase of life you are in. You see, Moses knew in camp the people demanded his time, and in camp his family would need him. So he figured out a way to balance all of those things while not forfeiting the most important meeting of the day, meeting with God. As I close today, I want to talk about 3 things Moses did when he went to the tent of meeting. Real quick. First of all, he went alone. Write that in. No one else went with him. He was in there with God one-on-one. I think corporate gatherings are awesome. I think the thing we're going to do next Sunday night when we come together and call a corporate meeting is awesome. I think our Monday nights are awesome. I think the altar times are awesome. And those are all great corporate events. But how many of you know God wants some one-on-one time? It's there in the one-on-one that we can hear from God and he can speak to us at an individual level. Well, when Moses would go, everybody wanted Moses' time. They wanted him to solve something. He's a leader of over 1.5 million people. There's always a need, but he would break away and go, hang on, folks, I got to get some one-on-one time with my Heavenly Father. Secondly, he was there, write it in, he was there to meet with God. I know that sounds simple, but there was no other agenda. I'm going to get alone so I can meet with my Lord. I want to hear from him. I want to spend time with him. I have no agenda. I have nothing else I want to accomplish. I just want to be in his presence. And thirdly, write it in, he gave God his undivided attention. We are so distracted in this world. We have so much that demands our time. But how many of you know God wants some one-on-one time with us? He wants you to set that phone down. He wants you to turn off that TV. He wants you to look him in the eye, spiritually speaking. He wants to be right there with you and have your heart and your mind and your soul. He wants to have that time with you. What an example of what establishing a meeting place looks like. As a result, Moses' actions, with Moses' actions, God responds to Moses. Look how God responded to Moses in Exodus 33:11. He established all these things, and listen to what it says. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would go back to the chaos of his life and camp and all of the duties. He would return to camp. As I read this, there were a few commentaries that said this: not that God has a face to look upon, But the sense is he spoke with him freely, clearly, in plain words, openly, without any reservation. And isn't that what the meeting place is all about? To get alone with our best friend and to speak humbly and openly with him. Hebrews 10:22, as the worship team comes out, says, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. And then Hebrews 4:16 says, let us come boldly into the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. If in 2020 you're going to make more than a resolution, you have to establish a place to meet with God regularly. I'm not saying it has to be long. I'm not saying it has to be out of some sense of duty. I'm just saying that if we're going to plug in, if we're going to hear him, Moses showed us a tent of meeting was so important to have in his life. And if Moses needed it in his life, how many of you know we need it in our life? So today, as we conclude this service, I thought we could just set up a little tent of meeting. I know it's corporate, but we can come down this morning. And I love that song they sang, the last song they sang. I was like, we're singing that song again. And I just want us to come down here. I'm setting up a little tent of meeting, and I'm calling some folks to come. And let's just take a minute. And could we lift our hands to heaven? And could we just take a moment in his presence? In just a second, we're going to bring the house lights down. And could everybody stand right now? And I'm going to call you down to the tent, those that want to come. Now listen, this tent is it's not a physical place. It might be a physical place for you, but how many of you know it's much more of an attitude, a spirit, a priority? That's what this tent really reflects. It's not just the physical place. It's an attitude and a priority list. And so today we've got the perfect song to sing. It's just gonna let us reflect. Imagine as Moses comes down from that mountain and he's slapped by reality that the kids he's been put over are a complete mess. This doesn't look anything like that he thought it was going to look. And then God says to him, hey, by the way, bud, I'm not going with you, because if I go with you, I'll kill you. I'll kill them all. I'm done. Now, you keep reading in 33. You can find out what happened. It's good news. Moses got in the tent and some things happened. God softened his stance. But have you ever felt that way? You come from Sunday and go to Monday and you're just slapped by reality right across the face. You see, Moses said, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm running to the tent of meeting. I need some answers. He didn't just run and get more busy. He didn't just start trying to solve all their problems. He said, oh God, I need to get with you. I need to hear from you, man. What do you got to say to me? This is a mess. And so this is what he did. He remembered what this thing was all about.